Good morning to Sam Sawyer, our editor-in-chief, Gerard O'Connell, our veteran Vatican correspondent. Habemus Papam. We have a new pope as of last night. We have him on the Osservatore Romano, the Vatican newspaper right here. Leo XIV, formerly Cardinal Robert Prevost. Jerry, I want to get your first reaction. What do you make of both the selection and the length of this conclave?
Well, I think it was stunning, the speed of the conclave, because since 1939, we've only had three other conclaves which were short. 1939, Pius XII was elected in 2 votes. He insisted on a third to make sure he had strong support from the cardinals. 1978, John Paul I was elected on the 4th ballot. 2005, Benedict XVI was elected on the 4th ballot. And now, 2025, Leo XIV was elected on the 4th ballot.
I think that's the first time I've heard you say the name.
So this is, I think, in a world which is so polarized, so divided, so much at war, it's an extraordinary witness from the Church of internal unity. It's an extraordinary achievement that you have 133 cardinals, many of whom can't recognize each other walking down the street.
Mm-hmm. Needed name tags.
That from 70 countries, that in just over 24 hours they can coalesce around one person, and obviously give enormous support, because a 4th ballot election is very significant. I think this is a witness to the world, a witness of unity and of hope in a divided world. And I think this is the first message that comes through. And I think, secondly, he must feel very strong as Pope that he can bring together so many different people in such a short time, and that they can say, this is the man. It's the work of the Holy Spirit, because this is, in a way, somebody said it's one of the miracles of Francis, because Francis created a conclave that technically, by world standards, they would have gone on for weeks to try and find unity. And in the space of 24 hours, we have a pope. And then, historically, we have a pope from a place weeks ago nobody here would have imagined possible, from America.
Yeah,
this is beyond the human machinations. And I think we really are, the cardinals, many said before they went into conclave, God has already made his choice. It's up to us to find the one that God has identified.
You know, Jerry, I was thinking yesterday and then all last night and this morning. In 2013, I never ever would have expected a Jesuit pope. I thought it was impossible. Up till 24 hours ago, I never ever would have expected an American pope. I thought it was impossible. And I mean, you told us that he was certainly in the running in your article just before the conclave. So we knew that it was out there, but I didn't really think it would happen until it had happened. And I guess now what I'm learning is the conclaves will surprise us and surprise us again.
I want to ask y'all about what we know about formerly Cardinal Prevost, now Pope Leo XIV. What are some of the things that stand out to you about him that you want to highlight for our listeners?
I think, when the church was in great difficulties in the 12th, 13th centuries, you saw the rise, and also in the 15th, 16th century, you saw the rise of religious orders to reform the church. Mm. And it's amazing that in the 21st century, we've had now 2 men from 2 religious orders, the Jesuits and the Augustinians, who come to reform the church. Remember when Francis was elected, everybody was drawing attention to the words that Jesus from the cross said to Francis, "Go and repair my church." Mm-hmm. And this Pope Leo, he is, in fact, he has taken the baton from Francis on the reform project. And while at the Mass, before the cardinals went into conclave, the Dean of the College of Cardinals didn't even mention Francis. Here, the successor mentioned Francis several times in his address, his first address to Rome, the city, which is his diocese, and to the world.
He thanked Francis twice to great applause both times.
And I thought it was significant that he used the word synodality in that address to the church in the world. I mean, that's not an easily recognizable word by a lot of people in the world who would have been watching. But for us, it was a sign that he was invoking and showing support for this Francis reform effort that, had been contested in the pre-conclave meetings, which I think is, again, kind of interesting given the plot of the pre-conclave meetings that we talked about just before they went into conclave, that it now ended with a resolution so quickly and on someone who seems very committed to synodality.
It's also interesting, they have this famous Roman saying, he who goes in as Pope comes out as Cardinal. Mm-hmm. And the great fear, I spoke to many cardinals, some on record, some off record, the great fear among those who strongly supported Francis especially was that we would have rollback from Francis. Mm. And Leo, from his first speeches, is made very clear, I am continuing the work that Francis started. Francis said he was starting processes. Here he is saying, I'm picking up and building on that. And I was struck at the homily at Mass this morning because there are several things there that are straight from Francis. He spoke about the need for daily conversion. And in Francis's first document, he spoke about the need for conversion. Leo spoke about starting with me.
This was the Mass that he celebrated this morning in the Sistine Chapel with all the cardinals.
Exactly. And it's also interesting, his first words to the world were, peace be with you all.
Right.
Peace. And in a world at war, where, as they were in conclave, India and Pakistan starting war. And one of the biggest, the most populated country in the world today is India and Pakistan, and there is all kinds of tensions there. And we already have Ukraine, Gaza, Myanmar, Democratic Republic of the Congo, and Sudan, plus 24 others.
Right. The first word being peace was really significant and definitely pointed to the fact that he's going to be an advocate for peace.
And also this really beautiful line where he said, peace be with you. It's the greeting of the risen Christ to his disciples. And then he described it as a disarmed peace and a disarming peace, which,
he's a good writer, y'all.
Yeah.
Even from the homily this morning, it was beautifully written.
But also, I think that's very significant, the name he chose. Mm-hmm. Francis, the name he chose was a program. Mm-hmm. He has chosen the name Leo, as we say here. He has chosen this name. The last Leo XIII was the Pope who really started what is known as the Catholic Church's social doctrine, commitment to the workers' rights, to the labor rights, to human rights, and this is a whole package. So he's committing the Church to continuing what Francis did, but what Leo XIII started.
Now, it's also interesting because Leo XIII is sometimes invoked for his condemnations of modernism and Americanism, too. And I wonder Sam, I want to ask you, what do you make of that?
Well, so, I think certainly the first thing I go to with Leo XIII is Rerum Novarum,
sure,
the great encyclical that kicked off modern Catholic social teaching in 1891 on capital and labor is actually the way that encyclical is subtitled.
Which also is so interesting that he chose this name at the time of the AI revolution, which is kind of our own industrial revolution now.
But also Leo XIII, with Aeternum Patris, the encyclical that defined Thomism as really like the philosophy for the church, and kicked off a renewal in the 20th century of the church's intellectual life in that engagement with Thomism. But I think, when I look back at Leo XIII, what I really see is both a very long papacy. I think the longest papacy in several hundred years, probably, but I'd have to double check that. A long papacy, but also the point where the church really began to come to grips with the Industrial Revolution, with the real changes in society, and to engage with them constructively and not just denouncing them. And I'm really encouraged by that. I mean, we'll see how it bears out, but I think it's also reframing for us. This is not just the question of what does Vatican II mean and how does Vatican II get received in the church, but how does the church engage with the world more deeply, rooting ourselves back in a history that goes back behind Vatican II to the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century, but also says the church has something to say to the world and it matters.
Yes, and the other thing that struck me about this, and it's obvious, I bought the various Italian papers this morning. Il Papa Americano. The American Pope is almost the title of at least 3, if not 4, maybe more papers. And the other one is the Pope of the Two Worlds. Mm-hmm. That's the North America and South America. And it struck me that it is in some ways a real irony of history that much of the opposition to Francis came from bishops in the United States and from groups in the United States. And it is extraordinary turnabout that from the United States comes a bishop, successor of Francis. A bishop, obviously, who was not working in the United States, but who was working in Latin America, in the poor area of Peru. And I think that I don't think one could have scripted this kind of solution at this time.
I'm so interested in this idea of him as a bridge builder figure, too. He talked about that in his Urbi et Orbi address. But, you know, you had him come out, again, there was a big question of what he would wear, right? Wearing the papal mozzetta that Francis had not worn. But at the same
red cape around the shoulders with the stole over it.
Right. And then at the same time, giving, you know, this very Francis speech. And I kind of wonder if he could be a bridge builder between these different Catholic groups in the U.S., you know, some of which are more in favor of these traditional aesthetics, and then that's sometimes seen as being in conflict, although I think it's a false dichotomy, with the Francis message, with the movement towards synodality. But here he was wrapping them up together.
Well, you know, I was thinking as well, in Francis, we had the first non-European pope in centuries, but with Italian roots, so a bridge back to Europe. In Leo, we have the first American pope, but an American pope from Latin America, who also, we should say, you know, while he grew up and was, you know, comes from Chicago, also holds Peruvian citizenship because he became a citizen there when he became bishop.
Yes, and in his family, Spanish and French roots. I mean,
and also Creole from New Orleans.
May I also say New Orleans roots?
Yes, but this is also a pope with immigrant roots.
Yes, absolutely.
And Francis was such, and this is, I'm very struck by this. What it can mean for the Catholic Church, 1.4 billion members across the world. If the Church in the United States is throwing its full weight behind the new pope, what will it mean for the whole church? What will it mean? What's the messages going? I think this will strengthen the church in an extraordinary way. And I said yesterday, Francis in heaven must be smiling because he has got a successor who is on full foursquare on his page.
Mm-hmm. What do y'all make of him being a missionary pope? We haven't had one of those in a long time. And I think, you know, it speaks to kind of this Vatican II message of the church as missionary, of lay people as missionary, which then was taken up with the synod. And so I just wanted to give some space to talk about that.
I wouldn't quite agree with you, Colleen, because
I love it when I disagree with you.
Francis was a missionary pope, and he saw himself very much in the footsteps of Francis Xavier, the great missionary to Asia. And Francis went so many times to Asia. In his last big trip was to Asia, and he was always going to the peripheries. He always, when you read the first document, the programmatic document, The Joy of the Gospel, Evangelii Gaudium, you see there Francis is talking about a missionary church. And remember, he, in the reform of the Roman Curia, he, up to then, for 500 years, the top office of the Roman Curia was the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, which was called previously the Holy Office, now the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith. Francis put that in the number 2 position and moved what was once the Congregation Propaganda Fide, the Congregation for the Evangelization of Peoples, now the Dicastery for Evangel, and he put that as the top.
Which is the kind of missionary office.
Yes, and he said in his reform of the Curia, we are a missionary church. So I think what we've had is a missionary direction originating in the Jesuit tradition, and a missionary church now continuing from the Augustinian tradition. We are going back to the Gospels. And he said this morning in his homily, when he said, our job is to proclaim Jesus Christ, Son of God, and to do it in fully making ourselves almost disappear. And he quotes Ignatius of Antioch, who was devoured by the beasts here. And he said, I, as Pope, am going to... In a way, there's this continuing of the humility that was so evident in Francis is now becoming visible in Leo.
And I think what I had in mind for the missionary thing, connecting it to Francis, was that Francis had, as a young Jesuit, wanted to be a missionary to Asia. And, he got to kind of fulfill that dream in his papacy. But here's Leo becoming Pope, having already been a missionary for like 20 years. And I don't know, it feels like kind of a fulfillment of that dream.
No, it's true. Francis had wanted to go to Japan. And Father Arupi says you can't because of your health. And, these decisions, if he had gone to Japan, he wouldn't have probably ended up as Pope. So we never know. The decisions seem personally big at the moment, and you don't know where they're leading to. And remember, if you think, Francis was the one who made him bishop, made Prevost bishop in Peru. Francis appointed him. A man born in Chicago, he appointed him as bishop in a diocese in Peru. And then he called him to Rome and put him as head of the congregation, now dicastery, for bishops. And he said to him, I brought you in because I want this dicastery to have missionary direction. And then he made him a cardinal only in 2023.
And I think Francis also made him president of the Commission for Latin America as well. So, and Francis is so much of Francis's own theological formation was in the Latin American church in Aparecida and the way that he worked together with the bishops of Latin America. So his confidence in appointing someone from the United States who first he sent him as a bishop to Peru, and then he called him to Rome, but also still with responsibility for the Latin American church. It really shows how successfully Prevost, now Leo, crossed cultures and was able to, as you said, this Pope of two worlds.
And let's talk about his time as a bishop in Peru, because I think that there's some wisdom that can be gleaned from, his experience there. He was not just a missionary bishop who kind of brought in other missionaries to run things, right? What we've learned now is that he actually, not only recruited local priests and trained them and educated them, but also put them in positions of responsibility and mentored them and made them able to administrate the diocese without relying on missionaries, so much so that when he left, the diocese was almost entirely run by native Peruvians.
Yes, and also, if we think he spent about 20 years of his life in Peru, he spent about 10 here in Rome, and I think 8, if I'm not mistaken, was head of the
Augustinians, the prior general, yeah.
in his headquarters was sitting almost next to the entrance to the Vatican.
In fact, both of you and I as well have been on top of the Augustinian headquarters because there are TV sets set up there where we've been doing commentary for the past week and a half.
Let's talk about him as an Augustinian. I mean, what do you guys make of this from what we know about the Augustinians?
Well, before we go to what we know about the Augustinians, just the fact that his order elected him, I believe, twice to two successive terms as prior general, I mean, that shows a tremendous amount of trust and that people are willing to, that his own brothers elect him to lead them. They trust him. They know that he's balanced, he's sane, he's calm. It really says something about his temperament. Somebody who can lead a religious community like that. Yeah, it's a huge vote of confidence in my mind, knowing, religious life from the inside. I'm really encouraged by that.
Yeah, I'm very struck by him, that his humility. He's a great listener. He's very quick in the pickup, and he is a man with a strong hand of government. He can take decisions and take them strong decisions, and you need this in the papacy. Francis was able to make decisions too, and strong decisions. And I really think, I go back to my thought that in this change, what Francis called change of epoch, the religious orders re-emerge as sources for the reform of the church in an age we don't know what is going to happen. We had the Industrial Revolution at one stage, but we have now the artificial intelligence, and nobody knows how this is going to impact every dimension of our lives. And here we have a man, Francis studied chemistry. Leo studied mathematics. And we have men who, Francis rarely used he never had a cell phone, but he was borrow cell phones to phone to Gaza and other places. But Leo, he's
tech savvy.
He's tech savvy, and he is also, like Francis, self-effacing. There's some cardinals, and you see them here, some church leaders, bishops, who like to walk in front of the cameras and to be seen.
I'm shocked to learn that there are cardinals who like to be seen.
Well, like Francis in this, he is a self-effacing leader.
Yeah, well, it's what he talked about in his homily this morning, right? You were referring to the quote that, was it Ignatius of Antioch?
Yes.
Yeah, when he talked about, he said, I'm reminding myself this first of all, but all of us are called to kind of make ourselves smaller so that Christ's presence can increase.
Well, and that also echoes something he said in the Urbi et Orbi blessing yesterday, quoting Augustine, where he said, with you I am a Christian, for you I am a bishop. So this vision where he said in the homily this morning, I'm reminding myself, first of all, that grounding his ministry as a bishop in his baptismal identity first and foremost. And I think that's something I expect we're going to continue to see that in the way he talks about governance and ministry in the church, because I think that's also reflected, as we've just begun learning, in the way he governed the Diocese of Chiclayo in Peru.
And also the way that he's run the Congregation for Bishops.
Yeah.
The Dicastery for Bishops.
Yeah, I think we're going to... Francis said, I start processes. We are now going to see those processes being developed, and in new ways, perhaps, that Francis hadn't even thought of. He is on Francis's page, but he's also very much his own man. And he's got ideas too. He's not devoid of ideas. And he comes with a global vision from having headed the Augustinian order.
Well, and it's not just his ideas either. He's known as a good listener too.
I think we're in a very interesting moment, and I think in his homily for the election of the Pope before the cardinals went into conclave, Cardinal Ray said, God has blessed the Church with great pontiffs over the last 100 years. And I think we can say that in the 21st century, he's blessed the church with great popes, starting with John Paul II, who was still in the 21st century. Benedict was of the 21st century. Francis, and now I think we're blessed to have such leaders at a time when a moral authority is needed in a world where we have big leaders with little moral authority, little ethic, and I think it's a strong message. I think God finds his own way. God is working in history, and he finds his own way of addressing the peoples of the 21st century.
Well, Jerry, Sam, I'm so excited to be covering this historic moment, the first American Pope, with you two at America Magazine. For our listeners, please stay tuned. The next things that will be coming up in these early days of Pope Leo's pontificate are he's going to do a Regina Coeli address from the Loggia on the Vatican on Sunday at midday. Then Monday, we're expecting him to have a meeting with journalists, and at some point he'll have an inauguration mass as well. So stay tuned to American Media, to Inside the Vatican, to Jesuitical, and we will be keeping you updated on what happens at those.